I'm going to show you how to instantly recognize any chord or melody, from simple two-note intervals to thick orchestral chords. But more importantly, I'm going to show you a way of relating to harmony in a musically useful way. We'll listen to examples of how unique chords have been tastefully used in film music, such as Star Wars and A Charlie Brown Christmas. Harmony is important because music is an emotional language, and harmony more than anything else determines what emotions the listener feels. Knowing how chords move people will not only allow you to recognize chords, but it will allow you to use those chords to make more emotionally meaningful music. Let's start simple with a major and minor triad. How would you describe the difference between the two? Most people would say something like the major chord is happy and the minor chord is sad, or the major chord is brighter while the minor chord is darker. That's a simple but effective way of remembering them, and it's useful. If I want the listener to feel happy, positive, jubilant, or something similar, I may consider using a major chord instead of a minor chord. Now let's see how we can use a similar process to recognize far more complex chords. About 15 years ago, I attended the best masterclass on music I've ever been to, taught by Stefan Harris, an incredible musician and educator. Early on in this class, Stefan walked over to the piano in the room and asked who can name this chord. Some shy hands went up, but nobody got it right. So Stefan said, how about this chord? Again, no one knew the answer. Stefan reassured us that by the end of the class, everyone would be able to recognize all of these chords. So he ran the experiment again, and this time, instead of trying to name the chords, he asked us to express how these chords made us feel.
I actually see music physically. Like some sounds have direction. Some sounds actually rise. Some sounds actually squeeze. Some sounds smile, right? Like a sound like this kind of goes. Can you feel that? Then you have sounds like this, just a half step up is like.
After Stefan played through these lush chords, he had us open our eyes, and then he showed us what types of facial expressions and motions people did for the most part whenever each chord was played. For example, this chord made people move like this. It kind of has this lift or this mysterious kind of quality to it. Compare that to this chord. That chord kind of has this mean bravado almost to it, a very different sound. Now let's compare that to the third chord. Now when I play the third chord, see how this makes you feel. This is a very, chaotic and tense and anxious kind of sound. Compare that to the first sound. It has many notes in common. In fact, only two notes are different, but they have very different sounds. Compare that to the other one.
So now I'm living in the world of emotion, not chords and scales, right? Because ultimately, these chords and scales only mean something to you and I. To our audience, they don't know anything about that, and they don't care. But they know love. They know vapor.
Now, I'm not going to go too far into the theory of these chords since that's not really in the scope of this video, but I'll at least explain the chords that I was playing earlier because they're probably new to a lot of you. These chords are all dominant chords, and the key ingredients to a dominant chord is a major third. We're in C, so C and E, and then that minor 7. We don't really need a fifth, a G here, because you could have a flat 5, you could have a sharp 5. You don't need a 5 in a dominant chord. It's still a dominant chord without it. So we're just going to play C, E, and B flat, and then on top of that, we're going to add some major triads for color. So the first chord I played was a D major triad over a C7 chord, like this. And then I did a E flat major triad over a C7 chord. That's the mean sounding one. And then I did a G flat major triad over C7. And I'm inverting it since I'm using a small keyboard here. Now you might be thinking this isn't very useful. How can I use these complicated, lush, very unique, maybe esoteric sounding chords in my own music? Well, let's take a look at some examples from popular films where composers use these chords to convey very appropriate emotions for that scene. Now I'm going to play that chord in isolation and ask you which emotion it makes you feel. Does this chord make you go like this? Does it make you go like this? Or does it make you go like this? Now, to me, it sounds like that first one. It sounds like D over C7, or in this case, F over E flat 7, because we're in a different key. It kind of has that rise and that mysterious sort of quality to it. So if we can tell the difference between complicated dominant chords like we just did, we can apply the same concept to simpler chords as well. So let's start by just adding notes to a major chord. So if I just have a major triad, it sounds like this. And then if I add in a major 7, it kind of makes it smile. It's a tender smile. It almost sounds a little bit nostalgic to me. Now compare that to adding a ninth to a major chord. So if I just play a major triad and then put a D on top, that kind of sounds like it's soaring. They're very different sounds. It's subtle, but it's different. And it's important to know when you're composing or improvising to know whether you're using one or the other or both. Now let's take a look at an example. So in Empire Strikes Back, John Williams uses one of these chords in the resolution to a phrase to convey a very specific emotion. It's either a major 7 chord or a major add 9 chord. So listen to see whether it has that tender smile or whether it seems to just kind of float. So does that last chord from Yoda's theme give you sort of a tender, sweet smile, or does it just sound kind of like it's floating? Now, to me, it sounds like that tender, sweet smile, which is coming from that major 7. Now, I'm going to show you the difference between the two again, a major 7 chord and a major 9 chord. This is a much different voicing than we used in Yoda's theme, but the color should still be the same. Now, compare that to a 9 chord. The 9 chord kind of has this floating quality. Whereas that sweetness comes from that major 7. Now I should also point out that the second chord from Yoda's theme is pretty similar to the first chord we took a look at. So if you recall, the first chord we took a look at was D over C7. And that's the one that kind of had this mysterious lift to it. And we get that mysterious lift from the triad built off of the 9th note of the scale, so D. Now we don't need that C7 chord underneath. In this case, in Yoda's theme, we just have a C, so it's D over C. or in this case. And we get that sort of mysterious lift that's perfect for Yoda's theme. Now let's listen to one last example from Star Wars and see if you can guess which chord John Williams used to convey the emotion of this moment in the film. And I'll give you a hint. Once again, it's one of the first 3 chords that I showed you. So it's either this kind of emotion, this kind of emotion, or this kind of emotion. Now, to me, this chord kind of has this anxious sort of sound to it, which is a perfect choice for this moment in the film, right? This is Luke Skywalker taking a chance against all odds to try to blow up the Death Star, and we have every reason to believe that it will fail. So it's a very anxious, intense moment right before we see finally the Death Star blowing up. So in order to convey that, John Williams used that G flat over C7 chord. In this case, it's in a different key, so it's D flat over G7. Since I'm using 25 key keyboard, I'll play it in C. But basically, the sound is this, which is an extremely tense and jarring sound, very much owing to that flat 9 and that flat 5. The easiest way to recognize harmony is by recognizing the emotion that harmony makes you feel. Once you've recognized that emotion, you've recognized the harmony. It's simply a matter of remembering which chord or intervals make you feel that way. And this can take some time, so I highly recommend practicing and starting slow. My recommendation is to start with just the intervals. See if you can recognize how the 12 different intervals sound within an octave. So for example, minor second, minor third, major third, and try to remember them based on how they make you feel. Once you've done that, you can move on to triads. We already could tell the difference between major and minor, but add in diminished, augmented. Those are less common, but a sus chord is like a triad. You could add that into the mix because it has its own flavor as well. Then once you've done that, you can start adding in what we would call extensions. So more notes on top of that chord. So 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths. And then you can really get a broad harmonic palette. You'll have more choices in order to convey very specific emotions to your listener. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you guys like the new style of content. I've usually done sound design videos, but I feel like I have a lot more to offer. And I feel that this topic is very important and overlooked. Most people have such an emphasis on sound design and timbre with their productions without ever really considering harmony that much. But harmony and timbre are very similar. They both have a huge impact on how music or sound makes you feel. If you're interested in supporting the channel and getting free stuff, check out my Patreon page. A link for that's in the video description. And thank you for watching.